The region of Candiota is situated in the southeast of the state of South Rio Grande at approximately 380 kilometers of Porto Alegre and 40 from the Uruguayan frontier, which includes the towns of Candiota, Valle, Piñeiro, Machado, Pedras Altas, Eiroval, Ulia Negra, y Aceguá. In the region is located the economical pole of Candiota, in which their activities are favored by its topography, its access ease, its geology, and the availability of water resources. Within its principal economical activities, the most recognized ones are exploitation of coal, such as Candiota and Civil Mines, cement industry like Cement Company of Brazil and Rio Branco Cement, UTPM, which is the Usina Termoeléctrica Presidente Medici.
The UTPM, the Candiota Power Station of Thermoelectrics, is located in South Rio Grande State and approximately 4 kilometers from the Uruguayan frontier. Since the end of the 80s and mostly the next decade, the UTPM started to be known by many political actors, NGOs, and the Uruguayan press as a generating source of a border environmental pollution known as acid rains.
The Brazilian coal, particularly the one produced in the Candiota deposits, has been environmentally condemned because of its low quality at east, represents as low quality, at east present low calorific power and high content of ashes and sulfuric. As it is known, all carboniferous activities, as all industrial producers, if they are not conveniently planified with the adequate adaptation of environmental control processes, they can generate a series of damage to the environment, sometimes with irreversible characters.
The case has its origins in the demands made by the local social and political actors in Uruguay, which pressured the government in order to negotiate with Brazil. In the moment of the denounce, a border pollution situation was generated, causing a series of damages in some department states in the frontier with Uruguay. Taking into account the complaints, perceptions, including the civil society, local politicians, deputies, and local governmental organs, the cause of the pollution problem were the UTPM. It was accused of generating damages to the economy of the border region, particularly over the cattle and the local flora.
From the alarm of the population of Cerro Largo in Uruguay, the governments of both countries were interested in solving the problem together. For this, the Jaguaron Act was signed providing the conduction of a joint monitoring to determine the existence of pollution and acid rain in the region. Subsequently, it was signed a bilateral agreement on environmental cooperation between Brazil and Uruguay. The agreements that were signed were implemented since 1992 by the FEPAM, the environmental agency of the state, and by DINAMA.
In the whole process, representatives of the Minister of International Relations of both states and other public dependents participated, as well as the state electric power company from Candiota. The implementations of the agreement generate institutional, political, and technological impacts, which will provide in the initial objective of the negotiation process, even though there were several scientific attempts to demonstrate that the UTPM was the principal cause of pollution in the zone. The studies couldn't demonstrate the existence of acid rain in the region. Both states decided to study the case separately, and yet they were unable to prove that the UTPM was guilty.
After 2 decades of negotiations and agreements, the case wasn't formally closed, diminishing the local, political, and social interest in Uruguay. The treatment to the problem became technically predominant, deteriorating its political condition.
Now, let us talk about the strategies used in this negotiation. Uruguay and Brazil used the same strategies within the negotiation as they were conditioned under the same interests, and the positions to achieve the goal were not established to take advantage of the situation. As Fisher mentioned, the previous existence of a good relationship constitutes a facilitating factor, as it increases mutual generation of trust between state decision makers. In this case, we highlight the relationship between Brazil and Uruguay, which has been characterized during the 20th century by the predominance of the development of bonds in the bilateral cooperation.
The strategies that were implemented were the following: the collaborative, as the mutual recognition of interests of each state contributed in order for the countries to reach an agreement. Both parts expressed the existence of a commitment to resolve the problem in a jointly way, showing great interest in the monitoring of the environmental effects. At the same time, for both countries, it was important to adopt this strategy, not only because they are neighboring countries, but they are both involved in different agreements, such as Mercosur.
Win-win. This strategy worked for both states as candiota was in the border between them and which presents a problem of possible pollution. This fact helps for both parties to leave aside the hard strategies, such as in win-lose negotiation, as they had a great level of cooperation between both states.
According to the non-specific compensation, during the period when the problem of candiota emerged, the government of Brazil was using diplomacy in environmental areas in a reactive manner, based on constant critiques done by developed countries in relation to the Brazilian responsibilities due to forest burning in the Amazonic area. This adverse international context influenced the Brazilian government in order to reach a bilateral agreement with Uruguay. The external environmental policy developed during the President Collor government had as main objective the improvement on the country's image abroad. The Brazilian government pretended to modify this image so that the country could be perceived as a reasonable country in an environmental matter, showing the international community that they were accomplishing their ambient duties and obligations.
Technical. As Uruguay did not have the appropriate technology to identify a border pollution produced by candiota, the negotiation was based on the need to determine in a cooperative way, by joint monitoring, the existence of that type of pollution. This fact interested both parties because it decreases the level of uncertainty over the environmental reality. Now, we are going to talk about some intercultural theories involved in this case. According to the Hofstede theory of cultural dimension, as shown in the graphic, both countries present similar results in the three first index and only differ a little in the uncertainty avoidance index, as Uruguay has a higher punctuation and thus has a very high preference for avoiding uncertainty.
Now, in the whole context, both countries, according to language, are situated in the high context category, which make them very diplomatic, as it could be seen in the case, as there were not any type of misunderstandings, always committed with a fair negotiation result and allowing the reaching of a successful agreement. Talking about time, it can be said that Uruguay and Brazil are characterized by a circular orientation. In general, all Latin American countries have the same characteristics, as their people have the custom of doing different tasks at the same time. Finally, according to the environment, the proximity is the factor that most characterizes both countries. As we mentioned before, they both have an interest of cooperating because of the relation they have, not only as neighbors but also as partners in different treaties, which make them to work together and leave aside the option of being dominant.
The developed argument of the case analysis goes forward as it pretended to show that the negotiations of both countries achieved and felt satisfied with interests obtaining jointly benefits. The power of alternatives influenced the negotiation process in the way that any part had a good partner. For both The best alternative was to negotiate. The commitment power was a relevant factor as there were two powerful agents interested on negotiating. The legitimacy of the claim by the Uruguayan government allowed the reaching of a negotiated agreement with Brazil, as the problem fact of the pollution was already recognized at the local level.
The final agreement stated that both governments had to commit in order to make a joint monitoring in which its principal outcome was the increase of the knowledge of the environmental reality of the region. This case is the only one known on a bilateral environmental negotiation about environmental cross-border pollution in Latin America, which reached positive outcomes, arriving to specific plans that were then implemented.
The practical recommendations following this concrete experience about the power in negotiations for people representing small countries with countries more powerful, showing asymmetry situations are the following.
It is recommendable to use a variety of power sources capable of influencing the behavior of the others in the negotiation, such as obtaining recognition and legitimacy of the claim by the more powerful state, in this case Brazil.
Seek to obtain benefits of good relations, raise an elegant solution to the other party, obtain commitments from relevant players, and have another alternative to the negotiated agreement.
It is recommendable for the weakest state the use of cooperative strategies and tactics based on the truths between parties when the context of negotiating shows predominance of the cooperative dimension between both parties over the conflict dimension.
It is recommendable for the weakest state the use of cooperative strategies and tactics based on the trust between parties when the context of the negotiation shows predominance of the cooperative dimension between both parties over the conflict dimension. They also should present and define the problem in an interesting way to the other party, encouraging the creation of a cooperative context and avoiding the generation of a misunderstanding context by the powerful state.